Hi, my name is Del Wilbur. I'm the White House editor for the LA Times. Joining me today is David Savage, the paper's Supreme Court correspondent. He just finished listening to 3 hours of argument before the Supreme Court over the Biden administration's regulations seeking to impose a vaccine mandate on more than 100 million employees in the United States. This is common as COVID infections are spiking thanks to the Omicron variant, and more than 830,000 people have died from the virus since it first landed in the US in early 2020. David, how did the argument go today at the Supreme Court? What's at stake?
Well, it didn't go very well for the Biden administration. As you know, Del, vaccines have become a very partisan issue. And I listened to 3 hours of argument, and it sure seems like the justices are split along the very partisan lines. That is, the 6 Republican appointees who are conservative, very skeptical of federal regulations, were steadily skeptical of whether the Biden administration had the authority to impose such a regulation on, as you said, nearly 100 million employees. The 3 Democratic appointees sounded just astonished that in the middle of a pandemic that the court would intervene to strike down a vaccine rule. Elena Kagan said, you think this is not necessary? This is the most extraordinary circumstance this country's been in a long time. Vaccines are what will stop the spread of the virus, and we're in danger of blocking that regulation. But it sure sounded like that 6 of them are going to say the administration does not have the authority to force all employers. The rule, Del, would say basically if you've got 100 employees, you have to require that they either be vaccinated or undergo weekly testing. And that's the really big rule. There's a separate rule involving hospitals and healthcare. The justices sounded a little more disposed to upholding that one, but it sure seemed like the conservatives are going to block the big rule and maybe both rules.
What's at the heart of conservatives' arguments against the bill? And I was listening to a little bit, and it seemed like the more liberal justices were trying to help the Solicitor General of the United States and the Biden administration come up with ways to parry some of the arguments.
Yeah, there's no question about that. To your first point, the conservatives really are skeptical of federal regulation. John Roberts made a point, and Justice Gorsuch noted it also, that, hey, by the way, we've upheld some state mandates of requiring vaccines that are state. They are believers in a part of the Constitution that people may not think about a lot. Basically, the notion is that states have real power to protect people, health, safety, public welfare, but the federal government has limited power. And they are very much inclined to limit the federal power and basically say, hey, this is up to the states. We don't want federal agencies and, in effect, federal bureaucrats to be setting rules or regulations that affect every business in the country.
And on the other side, liberals think there's obviously some space for OSHA, for example, to regulate these kinds of things. It was really interesting to me. I only listened to a part of it. Obviously, this is your ballpark, right? But it seemed to me that one of the judges, Alito, was asking a question is, well, has OSHA ever, maybe it wasn't him, has OSHA ever enacted a regulation that would affect workers outside of work as much as at work? The vaccine has this umbrella effect, but it seemed like I just don't know the justices as well as you do, but it seemed like they kind of tried to push back on that argument.
I found that argument a little bit far-fetched, but they're basically saying, oh, OSHA is only about occupational dangers. Like a famous example was asbestos or whatever. You go to work and there's asbestos, you could be endangered and in fact killed by. And that OSHA can only affect things that you actually encounter on the job. And the virus is not like that. You can get it anywhere. But Elena Kagan said, well, wait a minute. I mean, we've all experienced this. Every workforce in the country, every office has been transformed because, if you go to an office where there's 20 other people or 100 other people, you're potentially exposed to the virus. And so it certainly makes sense to say it's an occupational threat in this environment. But the conservatives were even skeptical that this qualifies as an occupational danger.
This was not the only case being argued today. There was another one involving the Health and Human Services Department trying to mandate vaccines at nursing homes and other healthcare facilities that take Medicare and Medicaid funding. And did that go better for the administration, or do you think it's about the same?
Yes, that was heard second. I do think it stands on a much stronger ground, and it sounded like Chief Justice Roberts was inclined to uphold that. So that rule is the Medicare Medicaid Act to give money to hospitals, nursing homes, and there's a part of the law that says the Secretary of Health and Human Services can impose regulations or requirements that are necessary to protect the health and safety of patients, which makes sense. We're funding the hospitals or whatever. It's reasonable for the government to be interested in protecting the health and safety, in this case, of elderly and sick patients. So the Biden administration has imposed this vaccine requirement for all hospital workers. Now, I must say, I find it sort of astonishing that there are hospital workers working with sick, very vulnerable people who are not vaccinated. But in September, when Biden first talked about that, they had a survey that was something like 30% of all the hospital employees in the country were not vaccinated. So they adopted this rule under the Medicare Act. The law seems pretty clear that the government has authority in this area. And I think it's quite possible that rule may survive. It sounded very closely. Roberts sounded like he was inclined to support that rule. So it sounds like a 5-4 split. But it's possible that the smaller rule will survive, but the big rule that affects all the employers nationwide seems like it's not going to survive.
Just to remind our listeners, though, Roberts switching is not enough. It's 6-3, right? Conservatives to liberals. So even if he joins Kagan, Sotomayor, and Breyer, that's still not enough.
Yes, you know the court and the current split. That's exactly right. John Roberts is a fairly conservative guy, but he's now got 5 justices to his right. And there's a certain number of cases, abortion seems like one of them, where he wants to go slow or find a conservative middle position, and there are 5 on his right. So it's possible that the 5 on his right may also vote to block the hospital rule as well. That seems like a close call.
And when do you think I'll reach a decision in this? What's next?
I have no good idea on that, Del. Usually, the court, there's one type of cases they hear where they grant review, they hear arguments, and they take months to hand down a decision. Other cases come up and they're asked to intervene and move quickly to block something. This came up that way. The Republican states business said block this, but they agreed to hear arguments because they know this is a big decision. And however they decide this, it is the whole ballgame. That is, if the regulation goes into effect, all the people are going to have to be tested. If the regulation doesn't go into effect, it doesn't matter what they think about it next summer. The issue is the next 6 months. They hinted that they might grant some temporary administrative stay just to tell everybody, we're going to put everything on hold for a week or two. But my guess is they're going to try to get out a short opinion pretty quickly, in a week, 2 weeks, or whatever, and try to decide this in January.
That's lightning fast by Supreme Court standards.
By their standards, yes, that is lightning fast.
Thank you, David Savage, for your time.
Good to be with you, Del.